It's Wednesday, April 24th. I'm Adam Walsh, and this is The Signal. Today on the show, we're asking, what supports do communities need on big social issues? It's a conversation about what we know, what we're learning, and what needs to be done. So think housing, food insecurity, transportation, and more. So through the course of this hour, or 55 minutes, we will hear from folks who are all working in different ways to support communities and the people in them. And guess what? When you do work like this, you can overlap with others, right? The work they're doing, what they're trying to do, and working together instead of in silos can lead to a lot of great stuff, which is what we're going to talk about. And as you were listening, if you have thoughts, right, on today's question, so the question, what supports do communities need on big social issues, or just thoughts on what you're hearing, text us 709-327-8206 or send us an email, thesignal@cbc.ca. Here with me in studio, we've got a full house again. We've got Beth Schwartz, Director of the Hub for the Study of Local Governance in Newfoundland and Labrador. Dieter Walsh, Director of Advocacy and Communications, MNL, Municipalities, Newfoundland and Labrador. Colin Corcoran, CEO of the Community Sector Council, NL. And Kathy Newhook, Manager of Public Policy and Communications with the Harris Centre. How are we all doing? Great to have you all back in here. I think it's none of you are strangers to me, so I won't say welcome for the first time. Welcome back, I should say. Give us an example. I'm just thinking, just to kick things off here, I want something tangible. Tell me something. Give me an example of something that, like, your organization or your work or whatever that makes a difference. Kathy, we'll start with you.
Oh, no pressure. Well, I mean, I just came out of a meeting about this particular thing, and it's one of the kind of flagship productions or publications that the Harris Centre does every year, and that's Vital Signs. We do it in partnership with the Community Foundation, Newfoundland and Labrador, and it's a newspaper-style publication, but its aim is really to kind of highlight what are the issues that Newfoundland and Labrador is currently wrestling with. So what are the things that people, families, communities, what's hitting home for people, what are they struggling with, and combining then statistical data that we have access to through StatsCan and various other sources, but also research from the university, and really summarizing that in a way that makes sense from the kitchen table to the boardroom table. You know, I often use my in-laws as like the litmus test of people who read the newspaper on the weekends and they're interested in stuff. And I want to make sure that it hits home for them and that they can see themselves in it. They understand what's going on. But then I've got a 14-year-old daughter, and so she can read it and understand what's going on. So it's really a way for Newfoundlanders and Labradorians to really like check in and see what's happening in the province, and it's a starting point for conversations and action and a way to engage.
Yes, folks can understand it at their dining room table, but at the same time, policymakers can understand it for pulling those levers and making decisions that will impact folks to then talk about at their dining room table.
I like to think of it as something that can live on your like desk for the full year as a guide to kind of say, oh, well, you know, what does this particular issue look like in Newfoundland and Labrador at this particular time? And at your fingertips, you have something that kind of points to some key information and data related to it, but also some stories about organizations and folks who are doing really interesting things about to kind of tackle those issues. So you've got a quick reference of some innovative ideas, but also, you know, critical information that we really need to frame those problems. Yeah. And it also shows the interconnectedness of the problems. And so I think that that's one of the things that Vital Signs is really good at, kind of tying all those pieces together. And it's one of the things that the Harris Centre tries to focus on. I often say we're like a half inch deep, 8 miles wide, know little bits about lots of things. Yeah. But it's really because there's so much crossover and connection between all of those things, and being able to see it spread out at the same time in the one place enables, you know, it allows your brain to make those connections in a way that you might not if you were just working in your silos, like you say, you know. And so it's a way for people to kind of make those connections, and then perhaps something that's a little bit different, a little bit more innovative might come out of that than you might expect otherwise.
And previous years, like it was climate change, healthcare, right? It's the thing that's really there around that space and time for the year that you folks kind of bet on for, like, hey, this is the big conversation, maybe the important thing that we are going to look at. When can we know for this year's?
This year's is actually going to be coming out towards the end of May, so it's May the 23rd. We've got the launch booked for that.
Amazing.
And I can give you a sneak preview of the topic because it's
only
a bit of a
here on the signal, folks. Only here. You're going to be very surprised. Actually, you're not. Go ahead.
It's a bit of a no-brainer. So this year, the focus is on the cost of living. And so we are looking at all of those things that people are really just, I mean, it's top of mind for everyone in every conversation. It seems like no matter where you are in life. And so we'll look at stuff like housing and food prices and all of those bits and bobs all tied in together and try to make sense of them.
We're going to do something on this, right? For a full signal show, hopefully. Fingers crossed.
That would be great.
See, that's how the magic happens, folks. I've booked another show for weeks from now. Amazing. Thank you, Colin. Now, that first question, give me an example of how what you do makes a difference.
That's a huge question. So we're currently in between celebratory and supporting right now. So last week was National Volunteer Week. And so for listeners out there, if you are a volunteer, I want to thank you for your time. You are among the 210,000 volunteers in this province who give the highest average hours in the entire country. And you are seen, your moments matter, and you matter. And I want to thank you right here and right now. And so we spent the last couple of weeks preparing and celebrating the sector in our province. And when I'm looking forward, and some of the interesting things that we're doing to support the sector is around the launch of our Social Innovation Lab. And so that's happening on May the 7th. And for us, it was the acknowledgement that we do need, as a community sector, a bit of that testing ground, that experimental phase where we can test and experiment and pilot initiatives in and around the realm of social innovation, try new things, understand what's working, break things, try it again. And so for us, it's the combination of various programs that we are doing. Because one, it's celebrating and the acknowledgement of the sector. The second is how do we get a little bit more in depth in order to really have those strategic interventions to allow the sector to grow and to prosper as well.
Beth.
What am I doing? Let me tell you. So I have, acknowledging that this is also going to be on multi-platforms, upside down, the Hub for the Study of Local Governance in Newfoundland and Labrador, which you pronounced correctly.
I did it
Amazing.
This time?
You did.
Hey.
And this was
took me 4 times.
formed in collaboration with the Harris Centre and Municipalities NL, and we launched at the Municipalities NL conference last October in St. John's. And what we're doing, the big thing that we're doing, I also brought so many other things that I can't find them.
There's a lot of sheets of paper in front of you.
Municipal connections is the thing that I want to talk about that I think that we're doing to make a difference. And that, so in addition to building personal relationships with these wonderful people, one of the things that this hub does is to bring the work that needs to be done for policy, local governance and local policy into the classroom to expand the capacity of local governments and local organizations across the province, because Colin talked about volunteers. Pretty much every municipal councillor and mayor in this province is a volunteer.
Right.
And so part-time, they have a job, they don't have time for this. And so there are students who are really capable and really smart and really want to be involved in making change and making things better, have been doing research in collaboration with community partners. So they did a bunch of work on the connection between climate change and food insecurity, and between transportation and food insecurity in partnership with Food First NL. They did work with the town of Portugal Cove St. Phillips to think about creating how one would create a rural public transit system that would serve the people in that community and beyond. Housing, right? We did that last term with M&L. So there's all kinds of really great stuff happening, and these students are really keen to then not only do the thing in the classroom, but also go outside and have jobs and work in this province to continue to make that kind of change that we need across all the sectors. So.
Well, and this comes up on the show for a bit, right? When we talk about our municipalities in Newfoundland and Labrador, a lot of times for those big social issues, there can be a lack of available data. But then if you have students who are like, hey, no, I kind of want to study this. And then you've got the volunteers who's the mayor, the deputy mayor, the councillor of you name it Cove, right? Mm-hmm. Be like, you know what, I could really use some of this data because we want to have some informed opinions. And you're like, oh, I can, it's easy to see the impact that it can have. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I just want to say that so far we haven't worked with any of the small municipalities that have very little capacity because they have so little capacity, and we're just starting out and trying to get this going, so we don't want to say, hey, volunteers, please spend a lot of your time with us as we work out the kinks of how these students are going to. So we're trying to work it out with some groups that have more capacity and more ability to support us and to get it right, totally right, before we bring it to communities that don't have that capacity. So.
Thank you for that. Thank you.
And speaking of communities or municipalities, Deetra?
Yeah, there's so many things to say here. I mean, really, I think what we're talking about is when you're talking about making a difference, we're talking about how are we problem solving.
Yeah.
Which is, on the one side, dealing with challenges, and to Colin's point, on the other side, talking about celebration, right? So municipalities, Newfoundland and Labrador, for anyone who does not know, represents the incorporated municipalities across the province. We represent the councils. And, the way in which we as an organization make a difference, I mean, it's multi, really. These are the folks who are closest. We say it's the level of government closest to the people. Arguably one of the most important orders of government, if you will. And so M&L as an organization does the work to support our members, mayors and councillors. We do work to share information and engage, and I'll just put a plug in. Next week is our symposium in Gander, and you're going to be there.
See, I just booked another show.
Yeah, exactly.
We're going to be there Thursday next week, live on location in Gander. One of my favorite shows to do because I get to talk to municipal leaders from across the province, folks who normally I may not run into in the run of a given week here in St. John. So this is such a favorite show of mine to do.
And we're so happy you're there. And there's just, again, there's so much to, when you speak to people who are, sort of there in community, you really see it from a different perspective. Part of the other work that we do at M&L to make a difference in the lives of those who are in government at the local level is to, provide services for them. And for my work as advocacy director is to advocate. And I think that's also where a lot of the important change in making a difference, for example, when there is policy, and I mean, this seems like the very boring stuff of people's life, but it is the essence. When a policy isn't working for either a local government or for individuals, we need people to challenge that. We need to make suggestions for change, which comes through data, which means engaging students, which means working with CSC and the Harris Center. All of these things are at the critical role of, like I said, making a difference. And a lot of the work as well we do at M&L is to really make advocacy at the budgetary level too. Yeah. And to, if our members say to us, we can't continue on like this, or we need more fiscal stability, or, most recently we need more support for our fire departments. A shout out to all of the amazing volunteer firefighters in our province who do incredible work every day. M&L and our sister organization, the Professional Municipal Administrators, we do that work to advocate on their behalf, make change, and hopefully make a difference. Again, there's still lots of challenges, but that's the work. That's the core of our work.
Yeah, it's funny. It's always that you talk about the glass, is it half full, half empty, or whatever else? Because we talk about there's the housing crisis, there's this affordability crisis that goes on, there's the drug epidemic, and all of this. So it can be hard to be optimistic, but at the same time, when you're working with people who are really into making change, you can see where there's a lot of optimism. So, but with all of this, right? And I want to go back to when we were talking about vital signs and like a big part of that's communication, right? So being able to have a conversation at the dining room table or in the policy boardroom, but this means people have to understand what's in it. How difficult in a world of over-jargonization, how difficult is it to get points across to be heard and understood these days? And how do you have to kind of check yourselves? For example, again, for me personally, with the reporting. It was learning, this is not over jargonization, but learning the difference between like, food security, food insecurity. Food insecurity a few years ago was like, I don't know what that is. And now it's in the news all the time. And I think it's something that more and more people really understand compared to 5 to 10 years ago. So that's an important kind of term to learn. But then there's lots of other big words that are like, no, don't understand those. What is that? Doesn't mean anything to me. And you lose people right away. So I'm just wondering what your thoughts are on it.
I think it's so important.
Yeah, obviously, yeah.
Obviously so important. Also, I like working with food personnel this term, so starting in January, I learned what the difference between food security and food insecurity is. And for those of you who don't know, it's food insecurity is about the experience of not having access to adequate, affordable, appropriate food.
Yeah, right. The food's out there, but you can't get access to it. Yeah.
Food security is more the sort of agriculture, international. Where does the food come from internationally? Can it get here on a boat? Is it locally grown? Like all that kind of stuff. So, and yes, of course, that impacts food insecurity. There's a link, but it's so those kinds of things are super important, and we don't really talk about those differences. But I really found that working with that. Universities don't train people to speak clearly.
I did a 6-year arts degree. I have memories of this from back when I was there.
And actually, many students come out of university less able to communicate their thoughts to other people than other non-academics than they did when they were coming in. So teaching students that skill is a really important thing. So again, if I take my beautiful flyers or summaries that the students did of their research, the goal was take this very big report that they wrote and all this research they did and get it into 1 or 2 pages to talk about the impact of climate change on food security in a way that is understandable to other academics, but also the community partner organization, also to the people that they are involved with. How do you communicate that in a way that doesn't involve a lot of jargon and doesn't involve a lot of words, hopefully? How can you get your 10,000 word paper into 2 pages with not the size 3 font and all covered in text? So it's really hard, but it's really important, and it really and having the students interact with real people, I guess. I mean, I guess they're real people too, but we're not real people for sure, the professors. So interacting with people in the community means that they can try it out with people. They can say, oh, we did this research on, and the people look at them totally blankly, and they're, oh, okay, we did this research about how food insecurity and climate change are related. And so then it can they see how what they're saying impacts other people, and I think that's a really important part of the jargoning part.
It's an interesting point because for me, communications is in my job title, and it's been a lot of my roles in many organizations for the last 20 years. But it's for me, it always really boils down to perspective and being able to kind of put yourself in other people's shoes. And so one of the things I always say to people when they are trying to translate their research or trying to translate even just an idea, trying to get an idea across, is put yourself in their position and think about the idea. Think about how this relates to their own experience. And I think the idea of being able to shift your position on things and understand different perspectives is really key to being able to translate, but it's also key to really boiling down that jargon and getting away from that, because immediately if you put yourself in the position of a community member or like a grandmother or a student or a policymaker, then when you shift your mind and your position to that role, then the jargon is either there or it's not. And when it's not, you need to come up with words that explain your concept around that. And I think the more we can shift our positions and think about other people's perspectives, I mean, it comes up with better ideas, but also you come up with an easier way of communicating with each other about complex issues, and that's exactly what we're dealing with right now.
That's such a good approach, right? And just as we talk about this, I just think when you have policy, if people don't understand it, you don't get buy-in, right? It's like, oh, the carbon tax is on the phone and would like to have a word, right? Because people don't understand some things, which we've done a previous show on the carbon tax, which I do encourage everyone. Go back to YouTube if you want to catch it, because there's some great explanations, especially with one of the guests here currently in the studio.
Yeah, and I think that might have been the day I forgot we were on TV too. So you can watch it on YouTube. I forgot that it was on YouTube.
Colin, what about your thoughts on this?
I'm listening and I'm agreeing with everybody around the table. And so when we take a step back and we think about how do we support and how do we solve problems, we solve problems by simply meeting people where they're to. Because at the end of the day, when you're talking about heavily integrated societal issues, particularly that are affecting multiple people in communities right across Newfoundland and Labrador, at the end of the day, you need that wisdom. You need that lived experience. You need the people who are experiencing those problems to be able to articulate to you what the problem is, and you to be able to articulate to them a meaningful solution or be able to capture an understanding of what the problem is. And so as I'm listening, I'm very much a fan of dejargonization wherever possible. And so I find that as we continue to create terms or use additional terms or iterate on terms, like essentially adding social in front of every business term possible, at the end of the day, what we're doing is we're creating a barrier. And we are actually creating a scenario where people can't access potentially some of the solutions or can't even engage in conversation because this is one more new term we have to Google. So my usual test is somebody Googling the term? If somebody's Googling a term, it's not a term we should be using. It should be a term we should be explaining.
I have an example. So teacher can go first, but then I want to...
No, go with the example.
Go right ahead.
Oh, I just want to say that it's not just like the people around the table. It's like that also is this kind of stuff also creates barriers between us, right? So I was... Colin and I were at an event at the Harris Center last week, and we were sitting at the same table, and the whole thing was about how do what you do contribute to social innovation? And I was like, I don't know what social innovation is. So I said, I raised my hand and asked the facilitator, like, what is social innovation? And they said, oh, you can, if you're a researcher, you can ask your people later. And I was like, but I can't answer the question unless I know what this thing is. I'm not being an academic. I'm being a person who doesn't know what you're talking about. And he was just like, oh, this is not a Harris Center person, by the way. And so Colin was like, oh, social innovation is this and this and this and this. And I was like, but I know. Anyway, it just created this huge barrier that social innovation is not complicated. It's just, as Colin was saying, like doing the things we want to do in new ways or different ways or reframing the ways we already did it in a new way so it seems new. Like all those things. But because it was framed in this, using this language, I had this like total block. Because as a non-business person, this idea of just putting social in front of every business term really like grates on me and my brain turns off. So I assume that happens to many people about many things.
Oh, it happens to me like multiple times a week when I invite different groups in and it's terms that people know and they're like, oh, the blah, blah, blah. I'm like, so I spend a lot of time Googling and trying to figure out how to explain it.
So this is one of these moments when my career trajectory really comes in handy. And for any young people out there, if you're not sure about what it is you want to do, don't worry. You're just going to listen to like 3 seconds of my story and go, wow, did she even know what she wanted to do? I started out as a journalist. Yeah. And then I switched over to sociology. When I finished that, I went on and did graduate studies, of course, thinking I was going to be a professor. I did postgraduate work. And then I ended up working for government up in the north. And then I went back to the university, and then I came here and am now working for municipalities, Newfoundland and Labrador. What has that afforded me? Perspective. And being able to sit on the side of being an academic, also being a policymaker, then on the nonprofit advocacy side, and also the journalism piece of, the benefit of good key messages. So, all of that to say, in answer to your question, I guess from an academic point of view, definitions matter if we're writing an article and you got to lay it all out. But then when do definitions matter and to whom? And sometimes there's issues, for example, housing. And in the municipal sector, we've talked about at M&L that, municipalities are increasingly having a role in housing. Well, that wasn't a space where we had a conversation. It didn't matter what the definitions were. We needed to create a space. We needed to allow for time. We needed to allow for key messages, both for our members, for public, so that if we want to call it knowledge mobilization or knowledge translation, you actually create a space for discourse or conversation or communication. And so we can all give ourselves a little bit of grace and say that does take time, it takes space, it takes repetition, and it takes commitment and enthusiasm. And sometimes key terms matter and the nuances do matter, and depending on what you're talking about, and other times they don't. And I think that's up to us communication professionals to help everybody navigate that, and as humans to navigate that ourselves in conversation with others.
So in this time of, like I said at the beginning of the show, right, we got a bunch of folks out there who care about communities, care about the big issues. They're all working, trying to work together as opposed to do things in silos. Big issues like food insecurity, the cost of living, housing and homelessness, you name it, climate change. How's it going? Like, is it hard? Like, are the silos? Silos obviously still exist in some areas, right? Because when we talk about health accord, it was we need to break them down within government, and then there's other areas. But for what you're seeing, how is the working together going compared to the silos of actually making change with some of these big items and
Feels
issues?
less lonely.
Yeah.
I mean, for me, I don't know how impactful it's been so far for me personally, because I've moved to Newfoundland and Labrador relatively recently, and so I haven't been doing this for that long. So that's its own silo, right? And so reaching out into and meeting these wonderful people and working with them and seeing how, when we talk about definitions, like what are I see these problems as in certain categories, but is that how other people see these problems? How are they interconnected? How do we think about them, and how can we bring new perspectives and old perspectives together to make real solutions by the people who are encountering them, and so as opposed to me sitting up here in my university and telling you what to do, and you're having this problem that I have defined for you. Let me solve it for you. Yeah. Like, that is not a good solution for anybody. So, so I think that it's been great, because even though progress is slow, and it really is, when you're not alone doing it, it feels a little bit like it's possible.
So think about this from two perspectives. Being on the receiving end of academia coming into community and helping us solve a problem. And I go back to Harris Center reports from over the years, particularly around the Irish Loop. And now in this role, doing effectively a similar role, coming into community, trying to understand what the problems are and trying to solve that as well. And I find that as Newfoundlanders and Labradorians, we're very proud people, and we're very much ingrained in place. We're very proud about the places that we're from. And so what I find for a silo perspective over the years, that has dissipated a little bit. I'm finding that, the overpass was torn down, but is the overpass really torn down some days? And so, but I'm finding that's starting to dissipate and is allowing more of the free movement of conversation and ideas and whatnot. And so I think as we continue to engage in these style conversations, and as grassroots organizers start looking out for help, and as organizations, be it from the university or from provincial organizations or other key actors who are out there, including government, are starting to then reach out to community because they're seeing the data, they're seeing the trends. We see the data and trends every single day. It's about reaching past that silo, reaching over the overpass and breaking it down even, understanding that at the end of the day, Newfoundland and Labrador is one province. What's happening on the West Coast could be happening on the Southwest Coast. What's happening on the Lab Straits could be happening in St. Mary's Bay. And that the conversation, allowing those conversations to happen, you might find that you discover a potential solution that didn't exist before. And so as we continue to think about our roles as capacity builders from a provincial downward, as we keep thinking about the people who are on the ground, who are worried about how to keep the water system on, to how they're now going to figure out economic development as a part of their powers as a municipality. It's that swift acknowledgement that we break down those barriers, and it's up to us to both reach out in order to do it.
I know what the overpass is, even though it has not existed since I live here.
Case in point.
This is good.
Constructs Day.
The role of that convener and bringing people together, that's been a role of the Harris Center for a really long time, and a space that we have always I would describe it as, we've got one foot in the university and one foot in the community, and we always need to kind of maintain that balance of, interacting with, researchers on the one hand and community folks on the other hand, and business and policymakers. But being that role of convener tends to lead to some really interesting, and has always led to some really interesting conversations. And I know one person said to me at one particular event, the Harris Center events are really great because it's like a gathering of the unusual suspects. And I always thought that was a great way of putting
That's
it,
so good.
because having a different set of people in a room sometimes can really change things up and break down those silos. But I have seen a difference. Even in the last, I would say in the last, 7 or 8 years, or maybe even 6 or 7 years, of a shifting to be a little bit more collaborative. And I don't know if, and a little bit less siloed. And I don't know if it's the level of crisis or the level of complexity of the issues, or maybe there's a little globalization and the internet coming into play. Who knows where that's coming from? But it's we're not the only group in town now that becomes a forum for the unusual suspects, and that, I think, is a really great place to be. The fact that there are more and more of those platforms for people to have the overlap and the conversations, and like Colin was saying, like the sharing of ideas between regions too, as much as we're grounded in place, understanding that an issue that the Northern Peninsula is facing looks a lot like the issue that the Burin Peninsula is facing, and we don't necessarily need to see the location or the kind of physical geographical boundaries as a boundary to sharing information and collaborating on solutions and that kind of thing. Maybe the mother of invention. What's the expression? Crisis is the mother of invention.
You just made that
There's
up,
something.
but it's excellent.
I like this
But
one.
there's
Because I was like, yes, there is
something
one. I was
the
trying
mother
to
of
remember.
invention. Necessity
There
is
you
the
go.
mother of invention.
Oh.
And I think that plays a bit of a role here in terms of the complexity and also the lack of capacity. Because if you're really struggling, if your community only has a part-time clerk and a volunteer everything, and you're seeing everyone kind of leaving, and another great quote from a colleague of mine is his uncle said to him, towns are dying, but not because people are leaving, but because people are dying. And it's dark, but there's a level of reality that kind of puts that to a crisis point where all your cards are on the table, and at this point we can't be siloed. We can't afford that anymore, and we need to be able to kind of collaborate and come together on these particular issues.
And we really see why people are concerned about this, geographic place-based, because there's, especially in public policy and government, there's a really bad history of government saying, hey, here's this thing that they did in wherever. It seems good. We're going to do it exactly like that, word for word, here, even though we're in an entirely different place with an entirely different legal context and entirely different cultural context. And so we realize that that's bad, but that doesn't mean that you can't look at that option and say, oh, how does this apply to us? What can we take from it? What can we not? And just to
Maybe Moose Jaw has great examples for public transit.
maybe
and I don't
Moose
know,
Jaw has
somewhere
public.
else.
Yeah, you
Like
can show
here.
that one. I don't have it in front of me, but on the transit side, they did some jurisdictional scans. So this one is about they were done with Portugal Cove St. Phillips, and so this group found 3 different models of public transit that could be applicable in Portugal Cove St. Phillips. One of them is from Oakville, which is not a tiny place. But the way that they do this particular transit program could be applicable there. Something from New Brunswick something from the Halifax Regional Municipality, Moose Jaw, Corner Brook, like all these kind of places have things that we can learn from, even if we don't do that specific thing exactly.
Yeah, like what's being done elsewhere? How does it work there? How could it work here, given the cultural context and what folks on the ground think about it, and whether or not they're interested at all, right? Like,
Right.
But these are the conversations.
And likewise, how do people from here, but from different parts of the province, do things? And is that applicable from the Northern Peninsula to the Burin Peninsula, or is it not? It could not be, but it might be, and we should think about that.
Some of the work that your students have pulled together has been really interesting for international students looking at the place-based kind of ideas here and looking at the particular issues that they're facing or that Newfoundlanders and Labradorians are facing, but with their own perspective of wherever they're coming from. And I think for a long time we're very introspective and thinking about Newfoundland and Labrador, and we're really unique, and there are unique issues here, but certainly there are crossover elsewhere in the world, and I think there's a lot of learning, and we have a great opportunity to be able to kind of bring those students into the conversation in ways that we haven't really done a whole lot of.
And many of the international students have lots of international experience, not just from where they're from, but also in other places in the world. So they've had, this is what I see at home, this is what I saw here, this is what I saw there, this is what I see here and where I currently am. And so then they can have that kind of and see like this, that definitely would not work here, but maybe this thing would, so.
You're listening to The Signal. I'm Adam Walsh, and today we're talking about local governance, and we're asking you, here's a question for you, right? So what supports do communities need on big social issues? If you have thoughts on this, text us 709-327-8206. Send us an email, thesignal@cbc.ca. Here with me for this conversation in the studio, Beth Schwartz, Director of the Hub for the Study of Local Governance in Newfoundland and Labrador, Dietrich Walsh, Director of Advocacy and Communications, Municipalities NL, Colin Corcoran, CEO, Community Sector Council, and Kathleen Newhook, Manager, Public Policy and Communications with the Harris Center. We had an email come in from Gavin Will, friend of the show. Gavin says, as a town councillor in Portugal Cove, St. Phillips, I see the need for provincial government to put resources into creating a regional transit system in the Northeast Avalon. Second line, the province's housing strategy is a good start, but its effectiveness is hobbled by a lack of affordable transit options. Municipalities lack the resources to implement a proper regional transit system. So, transit email from Gavin here. Mentioned the province. When it comes to whether we're putting information out about maybe policy decisions, when we're getting students to do stuff for communities, or we're in the the public sector, or whatever you want to call it, anywhere where we're looking at policy that's going to be changed or implemented, and spending, if dollars come into it, which is pretty much everywhere, it's the province or the feds. So I'm just wondering your thoughts on what Gavin is saying, or if you want to broaden it out for what you do, and then thinking about where the money comes from.
Can I start?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Gavin. And we haven't talked about this because I've been working with staff from Portugal Cove, St. Phillips, and not the council. But you will be pleased to know that these students have done a bunch of different things specifically about this. Well, not specifically about this. It's interesting. But what they have found, what I would say the finding is overall, is that there are lots of options for Portugal Cove, St. Phillips to create a transit system or a transit service of some kind within Portugal Cove, St. Phillips, and for the people of Portugal Cove, St. Phillips. But none of it is really financially possible if it's just, or useful, or that useful overall, if it's just Portugal Cove, St. Phillips. So this speaks to your point about regional transit systems, and we need to be working together because in some ways, like, even if there's perfect transportation, public transportation in your small town, if you can only stay in your small town, it's better than not being able to get around your small town, but it's not as good as being able to go visit your friends in other small towns or in the city. And so by working together, we can do that. And so we have all this new information that these students have pulled together. And one of the groups of students who was working on housing with MNL pointed to that exact thing, right? There's tons of international students and domestic students who would love to live in all of the surrounding communities outside of St. John's, but they can't do it because they can't afford a car, so they have to live somewhere where they can either get the bus, even though the bus is not great in St. John's, or that they can walk, because those are the only options. So, and they would love to live in your communities, and they would love to contribute to your communities and bring economic development and all this kind of stuff, but they can't because they can't get around.
Any other thoughts?
Well, I think the transit question is one of the biggest ones, perhaps. Well, there's so many big questions and so many big challenges. I mean, the list goes on. But we can't be deterred. But I think, it's the transit piece in cooperation, as Gavin said, with housing is pretty critical. We've been talking about transit for quite some time now at MNL. Of course, we've been talking about housing as well. And I honestly don't know at this point, what is the most immediate solution to deal with the geography of this province?
It's really hard.
Yeah, and I think Beth makes a great point. It's fine, and I know there are some superb examples even in our own province of communities doing great work with community buses and whatnot. But how about that inter-community transportation component when you're dealing with just the complexity and the geography that we have? But unfortunately, without it, we're so stifled in so many ways.
And
I think to go back to Gavin's point about the interconnectedness of transit, or if we just say transportation more broadly, that this is so interconnected. Another one of the projects that I don't have the image with me, they focused on the Northern Peninsula and the West Coast generally, and they literally mapped out all of the small transportation services that are available, public, private, taxis, shuttles, all that kind of stuff. So they called up people and said, in your community, what do you got? Who's providing services? And they mapped them. There's more than I thought, but not that many. And they mapped them against the locations where you can find food or find food for purchase, I guess. So, and it is shocking how disconnected many communities are from food if you don't have a personal vehicle, or you can't drive a personal vehicle for a wide variety of reasons. And so that kind of work is just the sort of visual image of this is what's available. These are the communities that have access. This is where the food stores are. This is how you can get to them from these communities. It's really eye-opening and not good. So I think that in some ways, thinking about it in that way, how does not just we need buses, but how do we get to
accessible transportation?
Affordable, accessible transportation that doesn't require you to be able to drive your own car. Yeah. And how can you use that to access the basic things in life, like housing, food, economic opportunities. Those are just sort of a basic thing, rather than we want to be Toronto and have public transit in Toronto, and wouldn't it be great if we had high-speed rail? Sure. But actually we just want to be able to support our communities because
that boils down to social determinants of health type stuff, right? Which is what we're all supposed to be kind of talking about as we reinvent it, as this province reinvents its healthcare system and everything else. And it, like you mentioned, where you could buy food. Also, look on a map of the food banks around Newfoundland and Labrador, and then have a transportation conversation around how folks are getting there, getting food for people who are really facing high levels of food insecurity, and that reality too, right? There's lots of what's the word we're using? Intersectionality when it comes to this stuff.
A lot of it is interconnected.
Yeah.
And so listening to the conversation, I always go to two places. What's in an ideal world and what's practical? And so the challenge I always find in a lot of this is, and Gavin, that's an excellent question, because at the end of the day, a lot of the things that we need to do is capitalize in order to find a solution. We need to finance a solution. At the end of the day, we need to find money in order to spend, in order to get to the solution that we need, be it on regional transits or a study of it or the creation of a high-speed rail, which I would love to see in Newfoundland and Labrador at some point. But for me, it always comes back to that in order to, and we talk about different orders of government, be it municipal, be it provincial, be it federal, there's a stark reality that there's a finite amount of money at the end of the day.
But actually, and sometimes there's lots of money around, and Deetra and Kathy may be able to speak. There's the federal government has this Rural Transit Solutions Fund that has lots of money for planning, for like capital expenses, but we don't have the structures and the governance for people to be able to get together and apply for it. So one of the motivations of the staff at Portugal Cove St. Philip's to come to me was that they wanted to apply to this fund, but they don't know where to start. Like there's money on the table for them to plan something, but they can't.
Communities in this province are leaving money available on the table for public transit solutions because they don't have the staffing mechanisms ability to apply for this money.
And they don't know how they could do it. Like they don't know they aren't transit experts. They aren't transportation experts. They don't know how it could work, and therefore what they would need to put in the RFP to get someone else to do it even. And Portugal Cove St. Philip's is really well resourced compared to other municipalities. So
I go back to my own experiences on council in Riverhead, and so very much a similar line of thinking. And so the challenge is then when public policy is aligned, when it is a priority for an order of government, it doesn't actually mean money flows because we have structural issues, capacity on the ground, and particularly when it comes to funding calls and applications. It's a matter of if your problem that you're trying to solve fits with a certain call, and if you're able to actually be in a position, both financially, from a capacity perspective, to actually answer that call.
Or if you're able to redefine or talk about the problem you're having in terms of the way that they want you to talk about it so that you can get that money, right? And maybe somebody could do that, but the people on the ground probably can't because they're just trying to deal with that problem.
And that's why at the end of the day, I go back to the practical. Because at the end of the day, if we are having a problem and we're waiting on one system to help us solve the problem, we're going to have to explore other ways to solve the problem. We're going to have to explore other ways to find capital, one way or another. And so transportation remains one of the almost quiet but prevalent issues in everything in community in Newfoundland and Labrador. Access to services, access to healthcare, access to being able to get to a grocery store, being able to access mental health supports in a neighboring community or somewhere else. And so when I think about these types of challenges, a lot of them are very interconnected. Usually one societal challenge has a coinciding or very integrated other societal challenge. The lack of transportation dovetails into food security. So the challenge remains for us is then how do we find the capital to do it? And that's where we sit back and we look at where is it working everywhere else. We know there's a number of places in Newfoundland and Labrador where regional or localized transportation services have emerged, and some of them are a social enterprise model. Some of them are a nonprofit model. Some of them have philanthropic investment because they believe strongly enough in it. Some of them have a revenue generation arm to it. And so when we're thinking about solving some of these large problems, we need to absolutely not think in the singular, that there's going to be one funding source for it. We need to put all the opportunities on the table so that we can actually get to it. Because at the end of the day, in the practical world, oftentimes public policy at the local, provincial, and national level is not always aligned.
No, definitely not. But also we need that. But I think I want to go back to that idea of regional from Gavin's email, right? Like that, it's not just that we have to. You're absolutely right. Yes, and right. We need all of the different options, but we also need some kind of structure that can coordinate them. Because if everybody's doing their own little thing, we don't have a transportation system. We have many transportation options, and that's a waste of resources. That's not an efficient use of money or time or people's efforts. And so having some kind of way to coordinate, regional is a super loaded word, but maybe togetherness or united or collaborative or something that is definitely not regionalization, but certainly it is working together to achieve this in a coordinated way is really necessary. Otherwise, we just have these then
it comes into talking about policies aligning, whether or not in this case, like for the Gavin Willing email, whether or not the province is buying into it. I mean, I saw a bunch of people at a photo op for Uber yesterday. the question now is, is there anything similar for public transit in the pipeline in the coming weeks, months,
and Uber
or years?
is not a good solution for any of the things that we're talking about. So we don't need to talk about that, but that is certainly something
It's a whole
that
other
I think.
show.
I would love to see the level of enthusiasm I saw yesterday amid the socials for public transit.
Yeah.
And the commitment, I think, and the point is, even in this is collaboration, and I agree completely, and in the scheme of conveners, then whose responsibility is it to do that harnessing, the collaborating? Is it the community? Is it the municipality? Is it the federal government? Is it the province? Because, we can say we shouldn't be doing things, in exclusion of one another, but then how do we get low, when the capacity issues are the way they are in community or with municipalities, then how can people think, on that larger scale of let's do this? So there's got to be some sort of solution in between, right?
I mean, and that is the role of government, of provincial and federal governments,
Yes.
right? Is to create that link between, because we all have full-time jobs, right? Everybody we're talking about already has a full-time job. So if we're going to do more, there needs to be more people involved and more organizations involved, and having that sort of legally and metaphorically above municipalities, that status. The province has this really important role that it hasn't taken up of doing this coordination and really providing these kinds of overviews, right? Because no community can be the overview, because that's the whole point of being local, is that we need both, right?
Yeah.
You can't just have the local, you have to have the overview as well. And so and in many provinces, that's what the provincial government does in transportation and housing and whatever, they don't do the things in the communities do those for their communities, but the province provides structures in terms of governance, in terms of regulations, in terms of money, that create an opportunity for people who have limited capacity to grab onto them and participate to the extent that they can participate, and to the extent that it's useful, instead of having to try to figure that out by themselves.
In most other provinces, isn't this the role of the regional government? I mean, I'm naming the elephant in the room, perhaps, but the intermediary level of collaboration that we don't have here. And I mean, we can have a whole other separate show about how this plays out, but maybe not. But there's a right now it's an ad hoc collaboration, and where there's willingness, where there are partners, where there's capacity, but that doesn't fit the model across the rest of the country. And what we're seeing now is the federal government's policies are really targeting the rest of the country's setup. And so where does that leave the really tiny municipalities here in this province? I mean, the fact that I don't know the numbers, Deidre, you would clearly know the numbers better than I would, but the Newfoundland and Labrador has about the same amount of municipalities as Ontario, does it not? It's
We have a lot.
we have a bananas amount.
275, over
Yeah.
78%, fewer than 1,000 people.
Yeah, and fewer than 1,000 people. And that, I think that doesn't hit home for anyone sitting in an office in Ottawa making decisions about how to roll out these programs across the whole of the country. And for Newfoundland and Labrador, I think so many times we get lumped into, and this is my own little soapbox stance on this kind of stuff. It really irritates me when we get lumped into Atlantic Canada on comparisons about, well, if it looks like this in Nova Scotia, then it should work here in Newfoundland and Labrador. And the differences between if you just look at a map and how many people are in each of those places, and the size of the land mass, and the way that the geography, the way that the population is spread out across those places, it doesn't make any sense for us in a Canadian context to be compared with any of the Atlantic provinces. I mean, culturally, sure. The access to the coast, absolutely. When it comes to geography and access to services and thinking about things like governance structure, not at all.
And we're going to have to leave it on that great point because oh my gosh, we are really out of time. Kathy Newick, Colin Corcoran, Dietrich Walsh, Elizabeth Schwartz, thank you so much for coming in here today on The Signal, looking ahead to tomorrow. How did COVID-19 impact business in this province and the region? How do we pivot? What did we learn? And what does it mean for the road ahead? It's a business, COVID, learning, future type conversation tomorrow on the show. Thank you for listening today. Bye.